Good news! The government-funded media continues to have us distracted and run cover for bad liberal policies, which are destroying Canada. And today, they ran a little bit of information. It was our boy Andy Chang, who I do like the videos he makes because they're entertaining and he's so close to being able to tell a good story. But then you pay attention and you go, oh yeah, I see what you're doing here, you slick little guy. It's very frustrating because we now know that they're running cover for multiple reasons. The capital gains tax is going to be devastating to Canada moving forward, especially long term, and they operate from a bad assumption from the get-go. And the other thing is, they're having us really focused on this capital gains stuff while all of this other corruption and the international interference and foreign interference that's happening right now, they're having us stuck on these other things that is basically arguing back and forth based on incorrect premises to begin with. But I really wanted to get into this one because his video started to pick up a lot of steam, and this is about the capital gains tax. Again, poorly presented to run cover for the government, but interesting. Let's get into it.
Gosh, you listen to these two. How are you supposed to know how an increase to the capital gains tax will affect you? Is it, as the finance minister suggests, a tax on the ultra-rich?
Only 0.13% of Canadians with an average annual income of $1.4 million will be affected by this change in any given year.
Or is it, as the opposition leader tells it, just crushing the little guy?
Mr. Speaker, if you are a small business owner, you have even $1 of investment gain, you pay this higher tax that the Prime Minister is promising.
Then, Pierre Poilievre puts out a video saying everything is broken and the country is broke.
Businesses, jobs, doctors, and food production will leave Canada.
And Justin Trudeau's like...
Yeah, so they're even referencing Pierre's video. We, talked about that in one of the ones here. It was a great video that, with all the information that it had. And I'm surprised CBC is acknowledging it.
Don't believe those guys.
They're all trying to spin it in 9 different ways.
So let's just try to calm down and figure this out.
Don't you tell me to calm down, Andy Chang. How dare you tell me to calm down? I have heard women love when you tell them to calm down and relax though, so I do that often.
Start real easy with what is the capital gains tax, but then we'll sort through how it's going up, who that affects, and ultimately, which politician, if any, is telling the truth. So this section won't be very long because it's actually really simple. Capital gains are just profits that you make from selling certain things. Stocks, bonds, investment properties, those are kind of the main ones, but it could also be shares in a business, crypto, precious metals on the stock market. But let's say I buy $100 worth of Apple shares. The company does well, and I'm able to sell for $200, which, if you do the math, that's a profit or a capital gain of plus $100. You with me so far, right? Now, in Canada, 50% of capital gains are taxed, like regular income. So let's say I make normally 50 grand a year. I add 50% of this, which is $50, to my income, and that's taxed at my regular income tax rate. So if I live in Ontario, that means I get taxed around 20% for making this much money. So the government takes 20%, that's $10 of what was ultimately a $100 profit.
Okay, what he has said is factually correct. What I want to point out, which I pointed out in the other capital gains tax video, is over time that this 100 has turned into 200, it quite possibly has lost 20% of its value. So yes, you made $100, but it's already buying you less things. You can buy less Big Macs per $100 because our money is worth less. So you're already getting taxed on inflation, and then this is taxed on top of that. So yes, correct, but it is more devastating than just that.
That's how things already are. What the government is going to do, effective June 25th of this year, is increase how much of my profits get taxed. So returning to this example, instead of getting taxed on just half of my capital gains, the government wants to increase this so-called inclusion rate to 2/3. So about 66% of my profits become taxable. And this is where I think a lot of misinformation has gone around, where people say that, oh, the government now wants to tax 66% of my profits. And that sounds like you're losing 66% of your money, but it's not that.
That's true. I've tried to correct people on this as well, because everybody goes, oh, so if I make all my money, you're taking 66%. That's not what it works. I think a lot of people were confused with that early on.
Making 66% of your money taxable, where 50% of it was already taxable. So now $66 of my original $100 profit is taxable at my current rate of about 20%. That means $13 goes to the government. Before it was 10, now it's 13.
So the reason I think this is funny is because he kind of says it like, oh, before it was 10, now it's 13. Because when you use smaller numbers like this, it doesn't sound like a big deal, except you go, oh, $10 to 13. That's literally 30% more that you're paying. So that's a lot. And especially when it starts to add up over time. First of all, the reason why I hate these arguments is because they operate under the assumption like, well, capital gains tax is inevitable. You need to pay at least that 50% regardless. That's already potentially too high, right? Because we're talking about how much you lose with inflation and the devaluation and all these things. Like, this is basically having an investment that's going up in value over time is just helping protect your wealth and trying to build for retirement and these other things. So already it's a bad system that we're built on having to pay capital gains. So I don't even agree with that to begin with. And then you're saying, oh, now on that same $100, you're going to be paying 30% more tax. The dollars paid will be 30% more tax. So that's the interesting part.
But wait, we're not done, because the government, perhaps realizing taxes are unpopular, has also created a $250,000 individual exemption.
Starting June 25th, if someone makes up to $250,000 in capital gains, they're still going to pay taxes on only half of that.
So in any given year,
oh, it's still just the base. You're still going to just pay all that 50%.
as long as my capital gains are less than $250,000, I don't have to pay the new 66% inclusion rate. I only pay capital gains tax on the same 50% that I always have. Meaning, even under the new rules in this scenario, because the profit is less than $250,000, I would still pay the old amount. Okay.
We don't think it's fair that a teacher or electrician pays taxes on 100% of their income, while a multimillionaire pays taxes only on 50% of the passive income they make on capital gains.
Lie, wrong, total misconception, because we broke it down in my other capital gains tax videos. 100% of income versus 100% of income. Well, yeah, that multi-millionaire blah, blah, blah is usually making a higher income that they're paying 100% of the tax on that they use with in these examples. So yes, on a one-time taxable capital gains event that he's calling passive income, which as a real estate investor is not passive. I deal with tenant issues all the time, turnover, people smashing units, tens of thousands of dollars in damage. It's not passive. So to say, oh, you're doing these things. And then the other thing is like, I'm a real estate agent, and everybody goes, oh, you're a real estate agent, you make all this money. Guys, in the last 2 years, I've lost money being a real estate agent. Legitimately, I've lost money being a real estate agent because the market has been so slow. I don't get a pension. I don't get a retirement. I'm not complaining because that's part of the risk you take in being a real estate agent. However, what I've done to mitigate that is I've also become a real estate investor, which means I have done my best to buy properties so that I can protect myself down the road in the future. All of this is being eroded by these jive turkeys. So here I am losing money for the last 2 years. I'm losing money and barely getting by. But you know, God forbid I want to retire when I'm older and buy some properties and have to pay way more tax.
So the government is telling the truth, right? That exemption is so big, $250,000, that surely only the ultra wealthy, the top 0.1%, cashing out hundreds of thousands of dollars in investments each year, only they would pay more. And then the government takes all that money and spends it on all kinds of nice things that we all like, right? Well, that's not really true.
I can't see how such a small percentage of the population will be affected by the new rates.
What is that hat, David?
To me, it has to be larger.
Really, you should look at it. How many people in their lifetime will be affected by this capital gains increase? And it's going to be a much higher number. And what I estimate, it's going to be something like 1.25 million people.
Okay, let's explore that. What the government isn't exactly coming right out and announcing is that, yes, while in any given year, very few Canadians are claiming more than $250,000 in capital gains, that's not to say that many Canadians will not claim that much at some point in their lives.
So you buy a cottage, let's say in 1980, Vancouver, the Toronto area, for let's say, $80,000. But then today you end up selling the cottage for $500,000. And so you have a capital gain of $420,000. But you only do that once.
That's Jack Mintz, by the way. He studied 10 years worth of StatsCan data from people who filed capital gains in Canada. What he found is that the majority of people only file once.
And in fact, that's what the data shows, is that 2/3 of people only have capital gains only once and or very infrequently during their lifetime.
So
And before people say, well, that's $420,000, must be nice to have $420,000. Yeah, we get it, guys. That's a lot of money. But he said 1980. And like I said, the inflation goal is 2.2%. We know it's higher. So, the 80s, 90s, 2000. So we're talking 30, 40 years of that inflation happening. That money is worth 1/3 of what it was in 1980. So it's like, yeah, it's $420,000 that they will be paying tax on already at 50%, and it's purchasing way less. Again, I understand it's a lot of money, which it is, but that person has lost value in that money over time. And again, some people don't have retirements.
Over a year, sure, you have, maybe tens of thousands of people filing these huge gains, which might make you think it's the top 1% of society, when in fact, a lot of it might just be a constantly revolving door of regular people cashing out their once-in-a-lifetime gains.
Yep.
Even a simple transfer of assets can count as a capital gain, even if no money changes hands.
And I said, why should I pay capital gain? I'm not selling it to them. I'm gifting it to them.
Farmers have lots of cash, but it's tied up in land, and the entire purpose behind farming is to pass it on to the next generation. So anything that makes that more complex, more difficult, and more expensive isn't good.
A lot of
Definitely not good. I also wouldn't even say farmers have lots of cash. I would say farmers have lots of wealth, which is all stored up in land and meant to be passed on down to next generation.
Canadians, I think, may have inherited those cottages, so maybe they weren't inherently wealthy to begin with.
These are the sorts of situations that Pierre Poilievre is staking his claim on, that Trudeau is taxing everybody to death.
And it's incredible. During a healthcare shortage, he wants to tax away our doctors. During a food price crisis, he wants to tax our farmers. He wants to tax our small business job creators.
So that was a lot. What is Poilievre talking about here? Well, small businesses. The idea there is that if an owner wants to sell their small business, like maybe they're retiring, they're winding things down, their nest egg just got a fair bit smaller. $1 million.
30%.
In after-tax profit under the old rules would shrink by about $100,000.
30% of their taxable amount smaller.
Under the new rules. if you care to see the math on that, we start with a capital gain, a profit of $1.36 million. And you'll see in a moment why I chose that number. Under the old regime, half of that was taxable, most likely at the highest tax bracket of 53%, assuming, once again, that you're in Ontario. Take that percentage away from this, from half of your profit, and you're paying about $360,000 in taxes. This minus this is what you're left with, a cool $1 million even. But under the new regime, someone selling their small business for the same amount of profit pays tax on half of the first $250,000. That's the individual exemption. That works out to about $66,000 in tax at our current tax rate. And on the remaining $1.11 million, 66% is taxable. That's about $732,000 that we have to pay taxes on at our 53% tax rate. That means you're paying almost $390,000 in tax on this amount. You add these two numbers here, you end up with a grand total of tax, $456,000, which is almost $100,000 more than we used to pay for the exact same sale.
And again, why are they increasing the taxes? To cover their deficits from their crazy spending as they destroy Canada. This is the argument that's being skipped over. Why are they increasing taxes? Because Canada is being run into the frickin' ground with mass immigration and all of our other horrible policies like carbon taxes that are, crushing people. Our cost of living is getting way worse. The government keeps spending and printing more money and they go, oh no, we keep spending and printing. How do we get this back? From individual small business owners, from people who have one-time taxable capital gains events. We're going to steal more money from them because we can't stop spending. That's why it's so funny too, because what do we argue? What is the difference in the spending? What is it being collected for? Because you guys, aka the Liberal government, don't know how to not spend. You only know tax and spend, tax and spend, tax and spend. Happy Father's Day, by the way, Trudeau. I saw some photos going around from your pops out there in Cuba.
Let's talk about doctors.
Anything that's making things harder for family physicians is really concerning to me because we know that over 6 million Canadians already don't have access to a primary care provider.
Many doctors don't collect salaries in quite the same way you and I might. Many of them incorporate, meaning in a legal and a financial sense, they become a company. Why incorporate? Well, it's a way of getting around high personal income taxes. So in Ontario, for example, instead of paying progressively more and more income tax, the more money I make, all the way up to the 53% tax bracket, an incorporated doctor could pay the small business tax rate, which is way lower. In Ontario, it adds up to about 12% total on the first $500,000 in taxable income. Now, a doctor can't stay a corporation forever. At some point, they need to draw down that money for personal use. But for all those years, the tax money that they saved, they were probably reinvesting through the company, buying stocks and bonds, which then grow in a compounded way, all the way to retirement. That's how many doctors plan for retirement. But under the new rules, once they sell those company assets, they'll get hit with this new, higher capital gains tax.
For example, my corporation, it's just me. There's no shareholders, there's nobody else making money. And so me as an individual saving for retirement, saving for sick leave or maternity leave, I'm going to be facing an increase in my taxes as I try to save for those things because doctors don't have access to pension or sick days or maternity leave or parental leave.
Yeah, doctors take on all the risk of building their own practices and then having to be small business owners, and they basically have staff and they run these things, and their only retirement is building and saving over time, and they're already, most of them are in some level of student debt. It takes a while before they're actually in profit from becoming a doctor. There's pretty interesting charts that I've seen of, somebody becoming a plumber right away and then somebody going to medical school and becoming a doctor, and it's not until like year 45 45 that the doctor's actually making not year 45, when they're 45 years old, where the doctor's actually technically making more money than the plumber. So, you know, in that time, that plumber's been making more money the entire time. So that's how big of a risk it is for doctors doing all this. So it'd be nice to know that they have some level of retirement at the end of it.
Officially, the position of the Canadian Medical Association is this change to the capital gains tax will hurt healthcare in Canada, especially because incorporated professionals, which includes many doctors, they don't benefit from the exemption on the first $250,000 in capital gains that we individuals get. So when they retire and start selling assets from the corporation, they're paying the new 66% inclusion rate from dollar number one. Depending on which province they live in, that's effectively like having your tax rate go up 8 to 10%. This, Poilievre argues, makes being a doctor in Canada much less attractive. He reasons this tax change punishes all the wrong people.
Haven't the Liberals learned that taxing away doctors, taxing away home builders, taxing away the entrepreneurs who make paychecks is economic wackoness?
All right, economic wackoness. I don't know if I like. He's doubling down on the wacko thing. Not my favorite. But the other thing is, they keep saying taxing away home builders. I've said it in the other video. The home builders themselves don't actually get taxed at the increased capital gains. But where this is going to be bad for Canada is investors will get taxed at the capital gains. And the less and less it starts to be worth it to be an investor, the less they're going to start buying properties. And people always say like, investors don't need to own everything. Investors, as the way that it's designed right now, are the big motivator and demand for building new housing, generally speaking, which means housing starts will slow if investors stop buying as much.
So, is Poilievre the one who's telling the truth?
Will it destroy jobs? That's a more difficult, nuanced question. So this is one more incentive to have people not start up business, not come here and to leave. But you're not going to have, I don't think you're going to have a wholesale departure of entrepreneurs.
It's going to definitely hit some of the very wealthiest people, no question about that. But there's going to be a lot of middle-class people that are going to be affected.
Oy vey, the middle-class people, they're going to be getting smoked. And that is what we're worried about because, again, you worked your whole life, you got an investment property, you saved your stocks because, you did exactly what they told you to do. You invested 10% into the markets for your entire life. You're finally selling all those shares. Man.
What makes this such a messy question is that Canada's tax code is complicated.
It's not messy, Andrew. More tax equals bad. That's it. It's a pretty simple formula, actually, if you do it that way.
The math, in reality, isn't always as clean as how I presented it to you. For example, there's what's called a lifetime capital gains exemption for certain asset sales. So the first $1 million a person makes from selling a business or a farm, for example, that's not taxable at all. 0% tax. And the Liberal government is increasing that exemption to $1.25 million. And honestly, there are just so many exceptions and eligibility requirements and qualifiers on just about every single aspect of the tax code. Way too many for us to go through here.
Yeah, and I agree. There's way too many to go through. You can't just be like, because tax is so individual because it depends on businesses. It depends on, what's exempt and all these other things. So I 100% agree to say, we'll paint with this broad brush. That's what we'll do. Doesn't make sense. What does make sense is increasing tax. Bad, not good. But thank you guys so much for watching the video today. I really do appreciate it. Do not forget to like and subscribe. Buy the Axe Attack shirts. I'm a real estate agent in London, Ontario, who's losing money, like I said in the video. So I appreciate all of the support I can get. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day.